again, and welcome to another Morning and Glory Warhammer 40k video. In today's episode, we shall be doing another event after action report, but this time it's a little bit different because we're not going to be talking about a tournament. Oh no 1 day 3 rounds or GTs or anything like that. Today I want to take you through the Apocalypse event that I ran recently, which had over 500,000 points of Warhammer 40k on the tables. And when I say today, that's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. We're not just using it as a figure of speech, because these tabletop battlefields were huge. There were genuine front lines involving thousands of infantry models and hundreds of tanks and artillery, and there were times when dozens of super heavies were lost in an afternoon. Titans fell like leaves. So if you're ready to delve into the mad world of Apocalypse, oh boy, do I have the video for you. Let's not mess around any further. Let's mount up, roll out, and nuke an entire Hive city right into this.
Attention guardsmen, the Commissariat has detected you have not yet liked this video. Do so immediately or else you will face the Emperor's wrath. And anyone who has not yet subscribed to the channel will be transferred to the penal battalions. That is all. Move out!
Now, before we get into the games themselves and the format of the event, I do want to do a few quick thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to Element Games, which was the venue that hosted the event. Element did an amazing job of looking after us this weekend. Their staff were on point and really helpful and friendly. In addition to this, they allowed us to come in early to help set the event up, and they stayed open a little bit later so we could help take everything down as well. And the amount of positive comments and feedback that I received from the players that were there, praising Element, saying it was one of the best gaming stores they've been to, it was just uncountable. So if you're ever looking for a venue to host any kind of Warhammer event, be it something big and narrative like this or just an RTT, I can highly recommend Element and I encourage you to check them out. But I also want to say a big thank you to everyone that came to the event. Running something like this was a first-time experience for me, and I was a little worried that it was going to be quite difficult and that managing this many people was going to be really hard. But thanks to everyone that came down, it was a dream. Everyone had the right attitude, we had no issues with people falling out or anything like that, and everyone just came to play some amazing narrative games, and that happened because of the attitude that they brought. So thank you to everyone that came to the event. You guys are what made it. And last but certainly not least, I want to do a few specific shout outs. I had a lot of help behind the scenes this year in getting the event ready, rocking and rolling. And a big part of that was having the teams somewhat balanced and well organized. And this was only possible thanks to the help that I got from the following people: Lord Prayer, Deaf Noise Marine, Think and Farm, and Brother Chucky. Thank you to all of you guys for your help. Couldn't have done it without you boys. But with all of that said, now let's dive into the video proper, starting with some background lore. So the name of the Apocalypse event was The Fate of Thanatos, and it was following on from the event we did last year, which was The Doom of Thanatos. Now, we had some lore written last year to lay the groundwork, but one of the big things that I wanted to do this year was have what had happened last year really influence the narrative and the background and be fed into the boards that we created this year. Essentially, I wanted to build a living world where people who played last year and things that had happened last year directly influenced and impacted what was happening at the event this year. So people were able to leave their mark on the world. They were able to read what happened, come back and seen how their actions had influenced the whole event. Essentially, this year I wanted to have a continuation of the storyline, and I wanted to use it to create a living world that the players could immerse themselves in. So with all of that said, what happened last year and how did it impact what was going on at the fate of Thanatos. Last year, the background lore was that Thanatos is an industrial world, but it's a bit of a paradox. Essentially, you have a hive world, but it's a lush, verdant hive world. Unlike places like Armageddon, where the cities exist, the Manufactorum exists, but everything outside those is essentially the ash waste, outside of a few isolated forests. On Thanatos, they are constantly trying to push the forest back. And that is because I came up with some pseudoscience, good old sci-fi pseudoscience, saying how it was just that tiny bit close to the sun, so it got that tiny bit more solar radiation, not enough to like kill everyone on the planet, but enough where there was just that extra bit of photosynthesis that could happen, so that essentially the trees would constantly be growing back, and you could cut a tree down, you could come back the next day, and you'd see it growing back already, if not it was fully grown. As a result, this planet was not only a hive world, but a Manufactorum, because the Imperium essentially had an endless source of fuel. Wood fuel not normally being very efficient, but when you've got an infinite amount of it, you can have pretty much all your furnaces and stuff running off it. Now, of course, with this being an Imperial world, there's going to be a certain level of brutality and corruption, and Thanatos was no exception. In fact, it was probably worse than most Imperial worlds. This is because the governor who was in charge was your typical ineffective, brutal, stupid, probably somewhat inbred governor whose family had been in power too long. Constantine just wanted to wine and dine, and anytime anyone came with any problems, they would be removed from their position. And anytime that the population decided to rise up or show any kind of protest, he would respond with just pushing them down and keeping them down. This whole thing was compounded by the fact the Adepts Mechanicus had far too much power on the planet and could often be considered the real rulers of the world. The Admech, well, this was an interesting planet. There's lots of resources here, and with the governor essentially away, just sort of playing at ruler, they kind of had free reign to do what they wanted, and stories of horrendous experiments being conducted on the population, people being snatched from the streets and turned into servitors, even for no purpose. All of this started combining into making a very, very unsettled population. And into this disquiet came the forces of chaos, and came the forces of the Genestealer cult, and they sowed their seeds into very fertile ground. And the beginning of the war, which was last year's event, essentially was the rebellion kicking off, with there being two sides. You've got the Imperial Loyalists, representing the forces that have come from off-world to help, and the Planetary Defense Force, and then you also had the Thanatos Liberation Army, which represented an unholy alliance between the Chaos and Xenos forces. Now, last year, we had about 40 people at the event, and these were spread across 4 different boards. We had Hive Primus with the Governor's Palace. We had the Manufactorum with the Mechanicus Inner Sanctum. There was the Gardens of Kadesh, which was the forests, which encompass much of the planet's surface. And then we also had the Polar Fortress. After the dust had settled at the end of the previous war, the Imperium had not only managed to retain control of Hive Primus, fending off a Chaos assault, but they had also launched a successful attack onto the Chaos stronghold, the Manufactorum, where the rebellion had first risen up, and so they controlled the urban population centres, which was very, very good. However, outside of the urban population centres, things had not gone so well. The Gardens of Kadesh were completely overrun by the Tyranids, who scored a total victory there. And even though the Imperials had captured the Polar Fortress, they'd only done this because the Chaos side had decided to sacrifice over 15,000 points of their own army in an ad hoc Chaos ritual. The result of this is I gave the tactical victory to the Imperial side, because they technically did win on 3 out of the 4 boards, but I gave the narrative victory to the forces of Chaos, because they had successfully opened a warp portal due to their due to their sacrifice. Just breaking the fourth wall for a moment, the Chaos team very much could have had a chance to draw or not, if not win, the Polar Fortress board, but they really embraced the narrative. They threw away their chance of traditional victory to do the sacrifice, and as a result, I thought they definitely deserved something for that, and so they got a narrative win. But to sum all of this up, essentially the Imperium had managed to win the last war, but there had been some dire consequences for the planet, and they had not completely eradicated the rebellion, and the forces of chaos and the Tyranids were now firmly entrenched on the world with some pretty significant beachheads. So what was going to happen this year? Well, to find out, let's head over to the story for the second war for Thanatos and also the format of the event. So this year, we doubled the size of the event from 40 to 80 tickets, and we also doubled the number of tables from 4 to 8. This meant that not only did we have the 4 original tables coming back, but we also had 4 new battle grids for players to fight for control over. The narrative explanation for this was that the war has started to grow and spiral out of control, and many parts of the planet are now being fought over. Last year, in the first battle for Thanatos, first war for Thanatos, it was a rebellion rising up at a few key locations trying to seize control of the planet. This year, both sides have been building up huge armies for some great offensives to try and fully reclaim control of the world. Now, the 8 boards that we went for were Hive Primus, and the Chaos Forces would be launching another assault, trying to take the Governor's Palace, trying to take the capital of the world. We had a return of the Manufactorum, but this time the Imperials would be defending it, and it would be the Chaos Forces trying to reclaim their spiritual headquarters, their heart of the rebellion, where everything had started. We then had the Underhive, which was the area below Hive Primus, where many of the rebels had fled to in the wake of last year's failed offensive. And we also had the infamous jungle board, the Gardens of Kadesh, return for another big pitched battle between both sides. On top of this, we had another jungle board this time because people loved it so much last time, and a lot of the crazy stories from the first event came from the jungle board. So we had another big one, which was called the Deepwoods. This is where the Tyranids had been bringing all of their biomass, and they've been creating lots of spawning pools, and the Imperium was launching an attack into the Deepwoods to try and destroy the Tyranid spawning pools. There was the Ostland Shield, which was a huge pitch battle, not in an urban environment, not in a Deepwoods environment, but in large rolling fields. And the story behind this was the Ostland Shield, the Ostland District, is the breadbasket of the planet. And the Imperium was trying to fortify it, but they hadn't quite finished all the fortifications. And this was an attack by Chaos Forces to try and punch through the gap in Imperial defenses and threaten the food supply, or at least take control of the food supply for the whole planet. There was the Spirit of Yarrick, which was the space station orbiting the world. And this was a huge Zone Mortalis board. And finally, we had the Inquisitorial Quarantine Zone, which was formerly known as the Polar Fortress, but with the warp portal being opened, essentially, no one was fighting over that fortress anymore. The Inquisition had spent the last year trying to contain the threat of chaos from spilling out over the world, and the Inquisition was going to launch a final large purge into the Chaos Shrine to close the portal and try and push back the forces of darkness, not just contain them. Now that gives you a brief overview of the background to each board, but there's a couple of things that I want to address before we get into the nitty-gritty, what happened in each mission. Firstly, one of the big questions I get about running an event like this is timings. How do you make it so that it's not just one long turn on either side and then basically nothing happens? We have a strict timer in place throughout the event where you get 1 hour to do your turn and then you have to hand over. So even though there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of points involved, a big part of it is actually managing your resources. There's no point in firing all the different lands. There's no point in moving all the different bits at the very back of the board. Just concentrate on what's happening on the front lines. This forces players to make quick decisions, and it really helps keep the pace of the event up. Another big thing is that we have the boards quite large, but we have it so that not every unit needs to be used at once. So a lot of the time, if you look at like Hive Primus, for example, it's a very long board, but a lot of the units are just being used at the back to garrison and to stop people from deep striking in. Because if you are trying to defend the Governor's Palace and you put everything on the front and put nothing on the back, then the Chaos Force are just going to deep strike in and just take the palace. So it forces players to spread out. So a lot of the time those units are still serving a very viable function and looking great on the table, but you're not having to worry about rolling dice for them until the battle starts getting in that sort of area. Another very important aspect of this event is the narrative. Players are highly encouraged to look around their boards, and if they can see something cool or something unique, or they get a good idea for what they want to try and achieve on the board, they can come up to myself or one of the other team captains and they can say, hey, I want to try and do this. Would this be possible? So a good example might be is, are you attacking, Hive Primus? Do you want to try and get past the curtain wall? Okay, well, you're struggling to take the choke points. Is there some way that you can bring that wall down? Do you have any like Cyclops demolition vehicles in your army? Things that, in the game of 40k, there's no mechanic for destroying terrain. But in this event, if you can come up with a good narrative justification and you can put enough effort behind it, then we will try and allow you to make that happen. A good way of thinking about this is it's like a D&D campaign. The players are the party. They have been dropped into this world and they've been given an overall mission. But how they achieve that mission is really up to them. And they are going to come up with things along the way that myself as the GM hasn't even thought of. And it's not my job to go, oh, well, there's no rule for that, so you can't do it. It's my job to come up with something on the fly or to have an idea in my head for how they might be able to achieve it and go, okay, I'm not going to tell you how to do this. I'm going to say it might be possible. If you guys can come up with a bit of effort on like how you want to achieve it, then I'll probably allow it. This essentially means that all of the narrative, all of the events, all of the crazy things that you hear about in the rest of this video, they were not my ideas. This was not something that I came up with. All of the narrative stuff, all of the weird and wacky and wonderful stuff you're about to hear was created by the players and driven by the players on the day as they essentially explored this sandbox. But you know what? I think that is enough pre-event preamble, if you will. Let's get into the games themselves.
Command, this is the 3rd platoon of the Cadian Regiment, reporting from the planetary capital, Hive Primus. The heretics have launched a major offensive. Due to constant enemy bombardment, our defensive lines are rapidly degrading. We are launching a counterattack with the goal of disrupting enemy operations, thereby allowing our main force time to regroup for the shock assault. I will report in once the operation is underway. 3rd platoon, out.
Let us begin with the Imperial capital, Hive Primus. The Chaos Forces were on the attack here. They wanted to break into the Hive City, fight their way up the streets, get to the Governor's Palace, and execute the planetary ruler. And if they managed to do that, they would achieve a total victory. But of course, getting all the way up this board is a very, very tall order, and there were other ways of determining who was going to win and lose on this map. Essentially, if the Chaos Forces never made it past the curtain wall, that would be a major Imperial victory. If the Chaos Forces were able to break into the city, then it would be a minor Imperial victory. If the Chaos Forces were able to take the middle of the board, it would be a minor Chaos victory. Essentially, they've not made the Governor's Palace, but they have essentially taken control of all parts of the map outside of it. And if the middle is contested, then it would be a draw. Now, last year, the Imperium had been content to hide behind their walls and essentially do a rolling retreat into the city, which had been very, very dicey for them. They had almost lost control of the city, but they just managed to hold out. This year, the Imperium wasn't going to be so passive on the defense, and they decided the best form of defense was attack. But the Chaos side had learned their own lessons from the game, and last year they had been able to put a lot of pressure on the Imperium because they had artillery superiority. And this year, they made sure they had that superiority once again. I don't know exactly how many artillery pieces the Chaos team brought, but there must have been at least 20 basilisks and half as many again on manticores, and then you had all the different praetors, there were death strikes. If it could fire indirect, the Chaos team had brought it and they were going to leverage it. Now on the first day, the Chaos offensive was a bit of a mixed bag. Over on the right hand side, they made some pretty good progress. This is where the majority of their artillery was, but also where their Astartes spearhead was. The Night Lords managing to make it up to the outer walls and starting to clear them by the end of the first day. However, the left flank was an entirely different story. The Imperium launched a counterattack using a Thunderhawk full of Space Wolves, and this cut right into the attack by the Chaos team and essentially turned what should have been an offensive into a defensive mission over on this side of the board. Chaos High Command realized early on that the issue with attacking Hive Primus was the choke points. It allowed the Imperial forces a degree of force concentration which Chaos was struggling to match. As a result, Chaos High Command realized that they needed to widen the battlefront, force the Imperials to fight wide, not force concentrated. But how to achieve this? Well, over the course of the first day, there had been several probing attempts at trying to destroy the curtain wall. A number of Cyclops demolition vehicles had been brought into contact with it over the course of the day, and they had noticed that damage could be done to them. Last year, it hadn't been possible to destroy the curtain wall, but this was the second war, and the defenses had been shoddily repaired. And as a result, the Chaos team had an idea. If they couldn't break through the walls, then they would just break the walls. And in typical Chaos fashion, they did this in the most bombastic and flamboyant and over-the-top way that they could. At the end of day one, they launched 3 batteries of Death Strike missiles. 8 tactical nuclear devices were launched into the wall at the same time as they took a Valkyrie loaded with Cyclops demolition vehicles and suicided it into the wall as well. This resulted in an apocalyptic nuclear explosion, utterly destroying the curtain wall and breaking open the Hive city, and the Chaos forces rushed into it at the beginning of day 2. Imperial Command was left reeling by this display of shock and awe, and they were forced to pull back to their secondary defense line, the Gelt Road. But here Imperial resolve stiffened, the line held, and the Chaos team, even though they made fantastic progress on day 2, could not force this line to collapse significantly. Imperial casualties were incredibly high. Entire companies of guard were thrown into the line to try and hold back the waves upon waves of Chaos armor and to plug gaps that were created by the overwhelming artillery and air superiority that the Chaos forces now enjoyed. But through this blood sacrifice, through this display of resolve, the Imperial team was able to hold the line by bringing in more and more of their rear echelon units to the front. But it turns out that this was all part of a cunning ploy by the Chaos team. You see, as the Imperial garrisons in the back line became thinner and thinner, the Chaos artillery suddenly switched their targets and started going after the rear echelon. This allowed them to create gaps. gaps in which they could deep strike. And when the Imperial team was feeling very, very confident, when they were patting themselves in the back, thinking that they had this in the bag, they had this mission wrapped up, the Chaos team was not going to get to the middle of the map, suddenly a huge gap was created in their backfield by a concentrated barrage of dozens of artillery pieces. And into this gap, the Chaos team was able to throw 20 Night Lord Raptors and Warp Talons right outside the Governor's Palace. After making a successful charge, they butchered the defenders holding the perimeter of the palace and broke their way into the courtyard itself. They were only one turn away from getting to the palace and slaughtering Governor Constantine. They just needed to survive whatever Imperial counterattack could be hastily thrown together. Las guns, bayonets, everything that could be thrown into the Night Lords was thrown at them. But they were still there. And the only thing that the Imperials had left was a countercharge from an honor guard of Space Wolves. It wasn't a guaranteed charge either. They rolled the dice, they managed to get it, and at the very last minute, the Night Lord assassination attempt was thwarted. Governor Constantine was successfully defended. As a result of all this, the Imperial defenders were able to control the Hive City, the Chaos attack did fail, and the Imperium was able to claim victory over Hive Primus the second year in a row. I just want to say a huge well done to both teams. Spirits were high all round, and even though the Chaos team definitely had a very difficult offensive ahead of them, they didn't give up once. They came up with lots of ingenious ways of trying to overcome the problems that they were encountering. I did not think they were going to launch 8 death strikes at the wall, I have to say, or suicidal plane of Cyclops in it. I have to say that was very, very well done. And I want to say a very, very, very well done. Big pound the back to the Chaos team for getting so close to the Governor's Palace. If they just managed to hold on one more turn, they could have turned everything around at the final hour. But well played to the Imperial team for making sure that they never thinned out their defenses too much, and for launching a successful last-minute attack into the Night Lords and making sure that they contained that very, very risky situation. But just as the Imperials were celebrating their victory, strange tremors and earthquakes rocked the ground. Let's head over to the Underhive. Now, the Underhive was a new board, and it represented the area underneath Hive Primus. At the end of the First War, when the Chaos Forces had been thrown out of the Hive, a lot of them had gone underground and had been setting up hidden bases underneath Hive Primus, ready to launch a second and unexpected front into the heart of Imperial society on Thanatos. The Imperium's plan was to enter the Underhive with a great show of force and conduct an extensive fire sweep, purging the Undercity of any scum and villainy. Now, when I gave the Imperial team their mission brief for this board, I said that there were a number of points of interest across the map, and there were specifically 3 very important places going across the middle. You had the ancient shrine, you had the refinery, and then you had the ammo cache. Now, when I gave the Imperial team their mission briefing, I said that there were 3 key locations on the map that they wanted to essentially control. These were suspected headquarters of the rebellion. There was the ancient church, there was the refinery, and then they had the military bunker. Their mission was to control these points and investigate them for any signs of traitorous or heretical activity. I then pulled to one side the Chaos team and said that they had a different mission. They had a sneaky mission. The Imperium was going to investigate the sites of interest, and doing so would give them clues to the real mission that the Chaos team was trying to achieve down here, which was to bring down the pillars that were holding up the roof of the Underhive. If they were able to bring these pillars down, it would seriously threaten the foundations of Hive Primus and might even lead to its collapse into the Undercity. So whilst the offensive was happening to kill the governor and destroy the city on the surface world, a very sinister threat to the Imperium was developing in the underworld. I advised the Chaos team to be clever about how they interacted with these pillars, because the moment that they started destroying them, the Imperium team would probably work out what the mission was. So they could spend a few turns like preparing them for demolition, and they could bring down multiple in one turn if they wanted to, or they could just get stuck in there and start destroying the pillars one at a time, the ones that were closest to them, and try and work their way across the map to get to the other ones. The conditions here were, if the majority of the pillars remained up, it would be an Imperial victory. If 4 of the 8 pillars were brought down, it would be a draw. If the majority of the pillars came down, it would be a Chaos victory. If all of the pillars remained up, it would be a total Imperial victory. If all of the pillars came down, it would be a total Chaos victory. So, with my words of caution and wisdom in the ears of the Chaos team, naturally the first thing they tried to do is bring one of the pillars down. Yep, subtlety was not the strong suit of the Chaos team on this board, but I absolutely loved it. They tried to bring one of the pillars down, and it took them a couple of turns, but they were successful in actually working out like how much effort was needed to bring one of these things down. At first they just tried to sort of like undermine it a little bit, but then they had like knights pulling on it, they had like Cyclops demolition vehicles going in there, they had Krieg demolition teams. They put a lot of effort, and they realized like this is the threshold that's kind of needed to bring one of these pillars down. Now the moment one of the pillars went down, 2 things happened. Firstly, I went over to the Hive Primus board and said, Hive Primus, just to let everyone know, you feel a strange tremor under your feet. They all looked around slightly confused and slightly worried, and then they saw that I had the pillar in my hand and went, oh God, what's happening in the Underhive? The second thing that happened was something I did not expect at all. Upon seeing that the Chaos team had destroyed a pillar, the Imperium team on the Underhive turned around to me and said, hey, can we destroy the pillars as well? Now, I have to admit, my poker face was not the strongest here. There was definitely visible shock on my face, and I was like, hey man, if they can destroy the pillars, you guys can destroy the pillars. I try not to give too much away, and apparently I was successful, because the Imperium team then spent the rest of day 1 also trying to destroy the pillars whilst investigating those suspected Chaos headquarters. Now, because of this unlikely joint task force between the Imperium and Chaos forces, by the end of day 1, sort of beginning of day 2, 5 out of the 8 pillars had been brought down. But at the same time, the Imperials had fully investigated all the points of interest. And over the first day, they had unlocked the secret message below the pillars. I think they realized at the end of day 1, beginning of day 2, that maybe they shouldn't have been trying to help the Chaos team destroy the pillars, but they've been having a ton of fun. They had been loving it. And fair play to them, they came up with an ingenious solution. You see, the Imperial forces in the Underhive consisted of a lot of knights, a lot of big knights as well. And they came up to me and said, look, we think we've messed up. We think we've been destroying pillars when we shouldn't have been. But we have a lot of knights in our team. Can we get the knights to become pillars? To like, if we move them into the place of where the pillars were, like roughly, can the knights like stand there holding the roof up? And I was like, that is an ingenious idea. That is a really, really clever idea. I had not thought of that at all. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Because that meant that not only did it give the Imperium team like a cool narrative thing to try and enact, but at the same time, it gave them purpose. It meant that day 1 was not the be-all and end-all of the Underhive. It meant that if the Imperium could get enough knights into position, they could potentially turn this loss into a victory. Over the course of day 2, all of the original pillars came down, but the Imperium managed to get 2 or 3 knights into position to hold the roof up. And what we said is basically, if you could hold the roof up by the, if you can have enough knights in position by the end of day 1, then you might lose this map, but it will buy time for you to get all of the other fire teams, because this is not just the only offensive down here, all the other fire teams and other areas of the hive, they can pull back and you'll be able to save a lot of manpower, and that will potentially give you a narrative victory here, or at the very least it will reduce your narrative loss because you've managed to save some manpower, save some resources to fight another day. And on the final turn of the final day, there was 1 knight left, gallantly holding the roof up, trying to buy time for his comrades to extract from the Underhive and to save their lives. But Imperial High Command over on Hive Primus had been watching the scenario unfold, and they were not interested in saving the lives of their men. They wanted to punish the Chaos team, for the Chaos forces, for daring to threaten the Undercity, for daring to enact such a cowardly and dastardly plan as to attack from below. Over the course of the second day on the Hive Primus map, the Imperial team had been investigating and taking control of a large building in the center of the map, which they determined was the city's hydro control plant. And just as that final knight was going into position, just as he was holding the roof up, the Imperial High Command was given a choice. Do you let the knight hold the roof up and get his comrades out, let the Imperial team extract safely from the Undercity, or do you flood it? Do you wipe the slate clean? Do you purge everyone down in the Undercity? Because the Chaos team, they've achieved their mission now. They're going to scuttle off. They're going to retreat into the Undercity, retreat out of there, and they're going to husband their own resources, and they're going to get their own men out of there. The Imperial Commander did not hesitate. He opened the floodgates, he unleashed the valves, and he swept away everything in the Undercity. Now, this was super, super, super cool. And I had it again, remember, none of these ideas were mine. All of these were come up with by the Imperial side. And so what we said was, the Chaos team has achieved a tactical victory on this board. They have brought down every single pillar. That's a total tactical victory. But the Imperium is going to get rule of cool and like a narrative victory here because they essentially they did such a cool idea. They just wiped everything out with the flood. However, if your foundations have just been removed and then you unleash an entire city's water supply into that area, into underneath your foundations, that is not good. And so what happened is we said the foundations collapsed, and then the whole city the whole of Hive Primus began to shake. A huge earthquake rattled the entire place. Sinkholes appeared, and it became very obvious that the city was collapsing. The Imperium managed to extract their high-value officers from Hive Primus, but ultimately the city sunk into the ground below and was destroyed. So the overall effect from the Hive Primus and Underhive boards were a tactical victory for the Imperium because they got the governor out, but a narrative loss because they lost the city. And for the Chaos side, they got a tactical victory because they destroyed the pillars and they managed to destroy the city, which was their goal, but a narrative loss for the Chaos side because city had been, they'd lost all the forces that were down there and they'd lost their underground base of operations. But I also gave the Imperium a bit of just a sort of a minor narrative loss down there as well, because the forces they committed down there were quite elite. There were a lot of knights and a lot of other like specialists down there, and they lost all of that stuff as well. So the Imperium lost a lot of manpower, but so did the Chaos team. But overall, it was a Chaos narrative loss. The third battle that took place was for the Manufactorum, and this was the final major urban board of the event. In the first war for Thanatos, the Manufactorum had been the Rebels' main stronghold, but the Imperium had managed to recapture it. This time it would be the Imperium on the defensive and the Rebel forces trying to storm it and take back their home base. Like with Hive Primus, there was the outer walls. These ones were much more improvised. And then you had the main Manufactorum, and after that, the Inner Sanctum, with the ultimate goal of the Chaos team being to make it to the Inner Sanctum. If they did that, they would get a total Chaos victory. Otherwise, like with Hive Primus, if they didn't get past the outer walls, it would be a major Imperial victory. If they took the walls but didn't get to the mid, it would be a minor Imperial victory. If they took the middle, it would be a minor Chaos victory. And of course, if they got to the second main defense line, it would be a major Chaos victory. Of course, if no one controlled the middle of the board, it would also be a draw. Hive Primus had a bit of an infamous reputation from last year for being a battle of attrition, and it was the same this year. There were no clever schemes, there were no fancy tactics, there was just blood, death and effort as the Chaos forces ground their way forward into the Manufactorum. Once again, the Imperium took the role of active defender, and so they launched waves after waves of counterattacks out of the Manufactorum to try and slow the Chaos forces down. And at the end of the first day, the Chaos forces had managed to get a workable breach on the left-hand flank, but were struggling to get up to the walls on the right-hand flank. But the Imperium was throwing away so many resources. And I have to say, the casualties that the Imperial team was taking far exceeded those of the Chaos. And we got towards the end of day one, and the Imperium team was looking very, very thin on this board. The Imperials tried to slow down the Chaos advance on the left-hand side by collapsing one of the industrial cranes, but the Chaos side was like, well, how can we get through that barricade? And I was like, well, you've got an armored company in front of you. And they said, can we drive through it? And I was like, if you take all these tanks and in one big push, drive them through that crane, I'll let you overwhelm that barricade. Which was a cool way of rewarding the Imperial team, because they did manage to block the Chaos infantry for a turn. And they also did a lot of damage to stuff that the crane fell onto. But it also meant that the Chaos team didn't have all of their day one progress undone by the Imperium just sealing the gap and basically ruining it. The left Chaos flank continued to make good progress, and by towards the end of the day two, they actually were starting to reach the second defense line, and they had started to flank the forces of the Imperium on the right-hand side, forcing another breach, because the Chaos forces basically had the gates and then had outflanked them, forcing the Imperials back to their secondary defense line. However, the Chaos forces had not completely destroyed the Imperials in the middle. And the Imperium actually had a lot of men and resources left over in the mid-board. Essentially, those forces had just been flanked. And there were a couple of turns left over, one available for each side, essentially. And so I had a little chat with the team captains, and I said, should we go for like a big showdown in the mid, where essentially everyone brings their force up, all of the stuff that's at the back, like artillery, everything, and you line everything up, and both sides get one last big turn to take the mid. Because that way it rewards the Imperial defenders for putting up such a sterling defense, and they get one last chance to do a big defensive action, and it rewards the Chaos players who have fought a really, really tough battle, and they get a chance to deliver one final decisive blow to the Imperium and knock them out in this theatre. It's just going to come down to who can take that mid-board. Both the team captains thought that was a good idea. I also ran it past the people on the board, and they also thought that was a good idea, so that's what we went for. One final showdown. The Imperium lined up on one side, the Chaos lined up on the other side. Whoever controlled the mid-board at the end would be the victor on the map. And if it was not clear who controlled it, it would be a draw. Both sides rolled off, and Chaos seized the initiative, and they delivered a horrendous blow to the Imperium, taking out forces left, right, and centre. The casualties, which for the Imperials had already been staggering, were beyond words. But the Imperium had the second turn, and they had the chance to counter-attack. And they took all of their remaining forces and they poured everything into the mid. And by the narrowest of margins, they were able to clearly control the middle of the board and get a very minor Imperial tactical win on the Manufactorum. But here's the thing. The Imperial team had received a lot of reinforcements on this board. Firstly, they had taken advantage of the combat ineffective mechanic, which is something we have specifically for this event, 3 times. What combat ineffective means is if a player essentially loses all of their army, like early on, like on day 1, then rather than having to basically spend the rest of the event sat out, they can bring back a small portion of their force, up to 2,000 points, and they can bring that back in their respawn zone, essentially in their backfield base. And they'd done this 3 times. On top of this, they had used one of the super stratagems that we had for the event called the Rapid Reaction Force, which also allows them to bring back some more points. In total, this meant that the Imperial team had actually received probably between 8,000 and 10,000 points of reinforcements on this map. Now, I'm going to hold my hands up here. We're going to break the fourth wall here for a moment, guys. And I'm going to hold my hands up here and say this shouldn't have happened. The point of the combat ineffective mechanic is to allow people to keep playing. It's to allow them to keep using their toys on the table. And it was used, okay in other areas, but we were pretty strict with it this year. And the only reason that the Imperials were able to bring back so much is essentially there was a miscommunication between myself and the Imperial side, and as a result they brought back about 10,000 points. Now that is a lot of points, and I personally believe that definitely swung the battle into the favor of the Imperium. I also think the Imperium were probably aware of the combat ineffective mechanic, and they threw away a lot of their resources knowing that, we can just get some stuff back, which again is not the point of the mechanic. The point of the mechanic is to allow you to keep playing, not allow you to basically get an infinite amount of free stuff so the attackers can never make any progress. So because of this, there's a number of outcomes from this table. Firstly, again, just keeping with the fourth wall break for a moment, we're going to actually scrap the combat ineffective mechanic. Because this is, I would say, it's only happened once in each event, but it has happened once in each event, where essentially the combat ineffective mechanic has been gamed slightly, and as a result, it has given one side an unfair advantage over the other. So it's going to go. A big part of the event that we're going to do next year is going to be, you need to husband your resources. You can't just throw everything away and then get a get out of jail free card. Okay. The other big thing is that we're probably going to be getting rid of the super stratagems as well, because they're meant to be fun. But again, twice in a row, once in each event, we've had the whole the rapid reaction force that lets people bring stuff back. And again, it's been too impactful. So we're basically next year going to be like, look, players bring their stuff and they've got to manage their resources, and we're going to give them the keys. We've tried these couple of cool mechanics, but they've not worked out the way we wanted them to. Now, going back to the narrative for a moment, the Chaos side inflicted, in my mind, and in reality, I would say at least 3 to 1 casualties on the Imperium. And they were attacking. So the narrative that we have come up with, or the narrative that we developed around the Manufactorum, is that the Chaos team absolutely, in real life, and they did this on the tabletop, and they've done this in the lore, is they bled the Imperial team white. The Imperials were forced to throw ever-increasing amount of reinforcements, ever-increasing amount of resources into this battle, and for what? To have the the symbolic victory of raising their flag over the middle of a ruined factory. I mean, technically they got a tactical victory, but the reality is that the narrative is that they are scraping the barrel in terms of manpower. Combine this with the manpower loss with the loss of Hive Primus, combine this with the loss of manpower in the Underhive, and we gave the Chaos side a major, not a minor, a major narrative victory on the Manufactorum, because they earned it. They earned it. They fought their way up under increasingly difficult circumstances, and they made an amazing effort. They never gave up. They were always in high spirits, and at the end of the day, they inflicted far more casualties on the enemy than they received. So the Imperium got the tactical victory on the Manufactorum, but the Chaos team got a big narrative victory. And that narrative feeds into the next event that we're going to do next year, and it's going to be the reason why there won't be reinforcements available, because essentially the Imperium has been bled white. There is no respawn mechanic, there is no reinforcement pool, there's no combat ineffective. The resources that are left are the resources that are left, and next year we're going to do another Thanatos event, but it will be probably the last event we do on the planet of Thanatos. If we do any more after next year, it'll be elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, the battle over the Manufactorum was epic, and it was awesome to see how it unfolded, and it was great to see how both sides really embraced the attritional slog. But at the same time, we need to be honest, and I want to be upfront with you guys. I think that there were some mistakes on this board, and I want to make sure those mistakes don't occur again, so that you guys have the confidence to know that we're trying to improve this event time after time. So fingers crossed next year we'll have got the formula nailed down, and we won't have the situation where one side is getting an unfair advantage over the other. Next up, we have the battle for the Ostland Shield. Now, the background to this table was the province of Ostland was the breadbasket of Thanatos. This is where the Imperium successfully cleared the forest and then planted loads of crops, so that the crops could constantly grow and the Imperium could get loads of food. And not only did this feed the whole planet, but it also was so successful because of the ecosystem of Thanatos that they could export food off-world as well. So Thanatos is very unique in the Imperium because it's not a hive world that requires imports. It's not only self-sustaining, it also does a huge amount of exports as well. Now, this was a part of the planet that last year had not seen the ravages of war, but the Chaos forces, the Heretic forces, had identified this as a key area that they could use to leverage against the Imperium. You see, if they're able to take control of the food, they're able to feed the populace. And if they can feed the populace and the Imperium can't, then it will sway more people over to their side. At the very least, if they can burn the Ostland Shield, then it means that the Imperium won't be able to feed their own people, and people become disgruntled and probably come over to the Chaos side anyway. This was the first time that we'd done one of the big boards, but instead of having it as a hammer and anvil style mission, we had it as Dawn of War. The idea was this was a huge pitched battle. The Imperium had been meant to build defenses to, shield the Ostland Shield, to create the Ostland Shield essentially, but they hadn't quite finished it. And so this was an attack on one of the gaps in the shield. Essentially, this was the Ostland Gap, and if the Chaos forces could punch through, they would essentially, win, and they would take out the food supply. And if the Imperials could hold, then they would retain control of the province of Ostland and of the food supply. Now, in terms of determining who won and lost on this mission, we had 2 large fields and 2 large towns, and then there was a big objective in the middle, which was a stone circle, a bit like Stonehenge, a cultural site as it were. Whoever controlled the majority of the objectives by the end of the weekend would be able to claim victory, and of course if it was an equal amount or there was lots of contested objectives, then it would end up as a draw. The Chaos team was on the attack, and they had deployed most of their Orcish players on this board. And it must have been the ferocity of the Orcs that allowed the Chaos team to go first, because they surged across the map. They not only spent a turn just moving and advancing across the board, but they also used one of the super stratagems, which gives you a double move on one board for one turn. These are once per event, by the way, these super strats. And they, by the end of turn 2, they had crossed over well over the halfway line, and the Imperium was under immense pressure from the Orcish assault. There was also Iron Warriors inside 2 Mastodons, a number of Titans. The Chaos team had brought a lot, but as is the case often in regular games of 40k, if you rush down a guard gun line, it can be very painful. And the guard got hit hard, but they hit back even harder. By the end of day 1, the Chaos forces were almost spent on the Ostland Shield. Imperial firepower had just been overwhelming. I think this was not only due to the fact that the Imperial Guard is a very shooty faction, but this was a relatively open board. I had envisaged for this board to be large open field, big tank battles, and one side brought lots and lots of tanks and lots of firepower, and one side brought lots and lots of orcs. So there was definitely maybe a little firepower advantage on the Imperial side, should we say, but we allowed the Orcs and the Chaos side to bring in a second wave because they had definitely earned it. They'd gone full-blown aggressiveness, and effort is always rewarded at these narrative events. So the Chaos side got a second wave in, and they used it really, really cleverly. So firstly, they had loads of Gretchen come in, and they sent the Gretchen like after the fields on the map, and they had I was like, oh, you meant to burn the fields. And they were like, well, can the Gretchen eat the fields? And I was like, yes, the Gretchen can eat the fields. So one of the fields was pretty much completely wiped out and completely consumed because the Gretchen spent the second day just eating, pissing and shitting and just soiling the ground and basically making it unusable whilst having a nice big tea party at the same time. The Orcs were also able to retain control of one of the villages throughout the entire event. The Imperium never got to it, and as a result they slaughtered all of the inhabitants, and they got to keep that objective and claim that as a victory on that objective there. But the Imperium by the end of the day did control one of the fields, and they also controlled the middle cultural site, and they also controlled one of the villages as well on the right hand flank. So overall it was an Imperial tactical victory, but there was a cool narrative event that happened on this board. Actually, there were two. Firstly, on this map was the Imperial Captain, and he had brought a Command Leviathan, which was a very, very cool model. And the Fallen that were on the Chaos side actually managed to deep strike around the Leviathan and then charge into it. And very, very well played to the Imperial Captain and the Fallen player, that's Lord Prayer and Chansey respectively, because they had this whole ongoing mechanic where the Chaos were like fighting their way up the levels to try and get to the general that was at the top of the Leviathan. And the Chaos team, they got close, man. They fought their way up these different levels, but at the end the governor was safe. But the other really big narrative event that happened was this cultural site in the middle. It looked a bit like Stonehenge. And the Imperium was like, oh, well, we think this is like an Orky cultural site or something, so we want to see if we can destroy it or interact with it in some way. And I was like, yeah, of course, try and interact with it. I like the idea of it being an Orky cultural site. Go for it. So the first thing they did is they rolled a Hellhound into it, and they chose to like self-detonate the Hellhound. And I was like, okay, flames erupt, engulfing the entire site. You think, surely you have destroyed it. What it turns out is that these stone pillars were covered in moss, and they're not actually stone at all. And as the flames recede and all of the moss and lichen is burnt off, it turns out that these are not stone pillars, these are metal pillars. And the metal that they are made out of is a strange black material that seems to absorb all of the light. And as you look closely to it, you see that there are necrotic green lines all over it, and it's definitely Orky made. Like the Orcs, it's hammered together, it's riveted together and everything, it's welded together, but the material that the Orcs have made it out of is definitely not an Orc material. It's another Xenos material that the Orcs have basically hammered into this, essentially some sort of Orc metal Stonehenge. The Imperium team rightly worried about this and thinking it's probably some sort of weird Orc Necron contraption, decided they need to destroy it. Now, I had said that after that they had blown up the Hellhound and the flames receded, it looked like the pillars had started to glow a little bit. So the Imperial team was like, okay, let's shoot them with a Shadow Sword. I'm like, okay, you shoot them with a Shadow Sword. Roll your hits, blah, blah, blah. And they got a couple of hits. And I said, okay, you've hit the pillars. 2 of the pillars are hit by a Shadow Sword. There's a blinding flash. And you think, yes, you've destroyed the pillars. But then as everyone's vision clears, you see that the 2 pillars you have hit have started to glow even brighter. It's like they're charging up. Now, it was at this point that I thought the Imperium team would get the hint that, like, the more they damage or try and damage these pillars, the more they're charging them up and they're essentially absorbing the damage. The Imperial team did not get that memo. They then proceeded in the next turn to fire 2 Shadow Swords at it. And I was like, okay, you've hit all the pillars now. They're all glowing intensely brightly with orky green energy. The more you are shooting these things, the more they appear to be absorbing your energy and charging up. So the Imperium team, a bit like in the Underhive, definitely wanted to try and definitely maybe got the wrong end of the stick. Perhaps I was a little too vague. I do know that the Imperium team was actually just having a bit of fun, and they could see that they probably had the tactical advantage on this board, so they wanted to see what would happen with this narrative event. So well played to the Imperial side, because they, along with the Orcs, were like, I wonder what the hell this thing is. Let's see what happens. Now, there was a bunch of other small narrative things that fed into, like, the charging of the pillars. For example, Ghazghkull killed a Imperial Knight whilst in vicinity of the pillars, and that helped charge, because that's a cool thing to happen. But the main thing was, on the final turn, the Orcs, they teleported a weird boy. They ran a weird boy with a bunch of Orcs around him onto the Orc cultural site, and then they targeted their own weird boy with another weird boy with the brain burster, and they killed him. And I was like, okay, so the Orc weird boy, surrounded by his acolytes, charge onto the objective. They're all charging, wah! They're all chanting, wah! 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 You know, they're all like banging their heads, like thumping their chest, and there's a lot of stealth Orc field around it at the moment, and just that all builds up, and all of the energy goes into the brain of the Orc weird boy. The other Orc weird boy puts an intense concentrated burst of Wah energy into the first one, blows his brain up, and out of his brain, all of this Orc energy flows into the pillars, and they become fully charged, and there is a huge green pulse and a huge Wah that seems to emanate from the very air itself, and this green pulse flashes into the heavens, and it seems like a signal has been sent. So essentially, the Imperium managed to get a tactical victory on this board by controlling 3 to 4 of the objectives by the end. But the Orcs had managed to destroy one of the villages, destroy one of the fields, and they had got their Wah energy off. So the narrative around the Ostland Shield is, as the dust settled, the Imperium looks around and sees that they've lost about half of their food supply for the planet. So that's definitely going to mean there's going to be some hungry mouths next year. And also, the reason we had the whole Orc pulse thing, the whole Orc Wah energy, Orc Wah ritual, as it were, is because the Orc players had come up to me at the end of the first day, and along with a bunch of other players, and said, oh man, it's been so much fun having like loads of Orcs on one table. We want to see if next year we can like organize a full Orc sub-team. We'll be on the Chaos side, of course, but we want to essentially see if we can have a table which is all Orc players, like 4 or 5 Orc players in one place. And I was like, that's a really cool idea. I love that, like having like a little Orc Wah turn up on the planet. That's amazing. So let's create this narrative event that will feed into next year's apocalypse, and if we have a whole Orc table, we can say this is how it happened. The Orcs that landed on planet got their Wah ritual off, it sent a pulse out, and other Orcs answered the call, and now there is Wah Thanatos happening, and we can use that for the next event, and we can potentially use that going forward for other events as well, to explain why there's a heavy Orc presence if this Orc sub-team ends up becoming its whole own thing, or if it just becomes like a regular group of people that come to these events once a year. I just wanted to basically have a narrative thing that might feed into it and allow the players to leave a lasting mark. Now, whilst all of these events were unfolding on the ground, there was, of course, the battle happening in the heavens with the fight for the spirit of Yarrick. This space station orbited the planet of Thanatos and acted as one of the main lines of orbital defense against spaceborne threats. So, of course, the Chaos forces want to take control of it to try and isolate the planet from the wider Imperium. The Loyalists would be defending the 5 main compartments of the space station. There was Enviro Control, the 3 hangars, and then the central compartment, which contained things like the shield generator and some of the other storage areas and command areas as well. Now, this board was a total wildcard, a complete experiment, and I had no idea if I was ever or even going to be able to pull it off, considering that it was going to take a lot of Zone Mortalis terrain, and I was relying upon the terrain available at Element. Turns out that Element has 2 full boarding action sets of terrain, which is enough to make a pretty sizable Zone Mortalis board, so that was awesome. I had put in the rules pack that if there wasn't enough terrain, we would have done another sort of standard pitch battle here. But as it turned out, the Spirit of Yarrick was a successful experiment because the players loved it. The feedback that I had from this board was just overwhelmingly positive. It was weird, it was wacky, it was different, and there were loads of crazy mechanics that people could take advantage of, like trying to decompress compartments and trying to blast people out to space and all this kind of stuff. And I just said to the players, look, you're on a space station. If you've got ideas and you think that, and both sides agree to them, just go for it. Come to me and let me know what you're doing. You don't even need to ask us. Let me know what you're doing. Like, this is a very much an experiment. I want you guys to run with it and have fun with it. And they did. So very, very well played to both sides on this board because they really embodied the spirit of the event, the spirit of Yarrick. And also, I ended up calling this the gentleman's board. It was the gentleman's game because both sides were just the height of sportsmanship. In terms of how deployment and everything worked here, the Imperials started in the main compartment with a few defenders in each of the outer compartments, and then the Chaos side did not start on the board. They could attack from any angle where essentially they could launch boarding torpedoes and breaching pods or teleport onto the board into any of the outer compartments, and then they could fight their way into the inner compartments. Now, I did this thinking that what would happen is the Imperial would deploy, the Chaos team would look at the Imperial defense and then go, oh, okay, well, we know that they've deployed loads over on, let's say, the left, so why don't we all board on the right-hand side? But Chaos is not a unified thing. The Chaos team is not a unified thing at all. And out of the 4 Chaos players that were here, each one decided to attack from a different angle. So you had Jez with his World Eaters attacking in one of the hangars. You had the Iron Warriors attacking in another hangar. You had the Necrons attacking in another hangar. And then you had the Tyranids that were attacking the Enviro Control. At first, I thought this might be some cunning Chaos ploy to try and spread the Imperial defenders thin and then quickly switch so they could put their reserves all into one of the hangars. But no, it turns out that each Chaos player basically went, this is my hangar now. I want this one. This is where I am. You guys do what you want. I've picked this one. Which I absolutely love because it truly embodies like the spirit of the ad hoc and fragmentary nature of the heretical side. It's not a unified faction. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and be damned if they work together. Now, there is a special shout out that I do want to do on this table. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to both the Chaos and the Imperium captains of this board because they did a great job of communicating and coming up with ideas and trying things out. And I think their attitude really fed into their teams, and that is what helped create such a gentlemanly atmosphere. I also want to do a shout out to Tyranid Guy. Now, there's a funny story around Tyranid Guy. Essentially, someone had dropped out last minute from the event, and they didn't tell us, and they were on the Spirit of Yarrick. They didn't tell us until about 9 o'clock the night before the event. Now, the guy that dropped out was meant to bring about 10,000 points worth of Chaos Terminators, and so with him not turning up, it could have really jeopardized the issue. It could have really jeopardized that board and made it really, really one-sided. But Tyranid Guy turned up on the day with a last-minute ticket and was like, oh yeah, I bought the ticket like yesterday. I've got 22,000 points of Tyranids. Where do you want me? And I was like, bro, get yo ass on the Spirit of Yarrick. So big thank you to Tyranid guy. He saved that board, and he was an amazing player. Now, he did have a lot of Tyranids, and to be fair, a few of them were unpainted and everything, and you are meant to have at least battle-ready models for the event. But because he saved our ass, of course, we made an exception, because without him, that board would have been very one-sided and probably not very fun for the players. And Tyranid guy, yeah, he brought 22,000 points of Tyranids, which obviously is a lot more than the original 10,000 that had been assigned to that board. But he was an absolute gem when it came to using them. He did not throw them all in at once. He fed them in a bit at a time. He mostly concentrated on his hangar, and then whenever it looked like his teammates were struggling a little bit, he was like, okay, here's a few turns to help you out. He did not use all of his 22,000 points, and he managed his resources really well. And it was a great example, and it's, to be honest, his example is what has made us, as the event organized, myself and Lord Prayer and some of the others have gone, okay, players actually like managing their resources. It actually makes for an extra layer. We're going to basically use this guy's example of what happened on the Spirit of Yarrick and feed that into the event next year. So it was very, not only did he do a really good job on his board and also make the table, he also has given us lots to think about when it comes to organization and sort of mechanics for the next event. Now, ultimately, the Spirit of Yarrick was successfully defended by the Imperiums. The Chaos spread themselves a little bit too thin, and it wasn't until late in the second day when they decided to just not attack on all fronts and instead start concentrating their forces on a couple of areas. They did successfully take 2 compartments when they did this. The World Eaters stormed one, thrashing the Custodies and pushing them back, and the Tyranids completely overran the Enviro control. The end sort of tactical result was a victory for the Imperium, but the narrative was that the Chaos and Tyranid forces have successfully established a beachhead on the Spirit of Yarrick, and the Imperial scans into Enviro control are very worrying, because the Tyranids are using the environmental controls to create the perfect environment for rapid organic growth. So the Imperium have got a bit of an infestation on their hands for next year.
Company command, we are under attack. Minions of the Dark Gods have penetrated our defenses, and we've encountered a new threat. Tyranids. We cannot hold this sector without reinforcement. I say again, we can't hold out much longer.
Now, speaking of Tyranid infestations, this is something that Thanatos has a really big problem with after the events of the First War. During the first battles for the Garden of Kadesh, the Imperial forces have been overwhelmed by just an infinite number of Tyranid bugs. But they weren't going to take that defeat lying down, and they were going back to the Gardens of Kadesh to try and reclaim the most holy site on the planet, and if they couldn't reclaim it, at the very least they could extract some relics from it. This year, the Garden of Kadesh was going to be another pitched battle. I did think about having it as an attacker-defender thing, but I thought we already had quite a few of those going on with like the Manufactorum and also with the Hive Primus, so I kept this as a pitched battle. Essentially, the Imperium is launching an attack to try and reclaim the Garden of Kadesh, whilst at the same time, the Tyranids are spreading out throughout the entire forest, trying to expand their own zone of control as well. This map consisted of 5 primary objectives. You had the Cathedral of Kadesh in the center, and then on one side you had the old fort and the military radar station, and then on the other side you had Sloppy Bottom Village and the landing pad. But the thing that really defines these jungle boards is the dense forest terrain. Now, these forests are so dense due to Thanatos' ecosystem that you cannot see through them. They are essentially impenetrable. But when you are in the forest, you can essentially fight within them. So think of each of the forests as like a Thunderdome. And once you go into the forest, you can sort of fight over them, point blank firefights, charges, bayonets, all that kind of good stuff. But the moment you're outside of them, you just can't penetrate the dense foliage. However, there were ways that both sides could investigate their respective military sites. On the Tyranid side, they had the radar station. On the Imperium side, they had the landing pad. And if they investigated those successfully, then it would allow you to shoot into the forest. You couldn't shoot through them, and a big reason for that was we didn't want it to become a total shooting gallery, but you could shoot into them so that you could at least support troops that were trying to clear them out. The primary objective for both sides was to control the majority of these key locations. Now, both sides started with 2 in their deployment zones, so there was always going to be a chance it was going to be a big fight over the church in the center, but it did mean that you could launch good flank attacks as well, and if you did that, you might be able to take one of the enemy's home objectives. Both sides had a secondary narrative objective as well. The Imperium wanted to take the church, re-secure the area, because it was the most important spiritual site on the planet. If they couldn't retake it, at the very least, they had to try and extract relics from it. Essentially, they had to control it for a turn or 2, and if they did that, they'd be able to start getting out some of the holy relics from the various not only from the church, but there's another one that they could extract from. There was a destroyed rhino, and I said that this rhino tried to get relics out at the end of the last battle in the First War, but hadn't quite made it. So there were a couple of areas where they were trying to either secure these relics or extract them off the board. The Chaos/Tyranid side, of course, wanted to desecrate these holy sites. And if they achieved this, there would definitely be some narrative implications. Now, if the first battle for Kadesh had been a one-sided slaughter, second battle was anything but. I would say this was the most balanced board of the entire event. Attack and counterattack. Every single turn it seemed to swing back and forth, and all the players on both sides agreed that at any time it could have gone one way or another. It was balanced on a knife's edge. On the right flank, we had the orcs pushing through the forests, and a brutal campaign of close combat and developed on the right forest as the orcs tried to push through to threaten the Imperial's military base. Likewise, on the left-hand side, the Tyranids leveraged endless waves just to overwhelm the Imperium on the left flank. But in both cases, whilst the Xenos forces pushed hard, the Imperium, and when the Imperium was driven back, they did not bend, they did not break. It was a very well organized defense. And whilst the Imperium was doing that, at the same time, they launched an incredible counterattack, an incredible thrust of their own into the center. They wanted that church. And at the end of the end of the 2 days, the final push of the Imperium saw them get platoons of infantry, multiple squads of Bulgrin. Little side note, by the way, one of the players here turned up with, I think it was 84 Bulgrin and 60 Ogrin in Hades breaching drills. Absolute mad lad. I love that bastard. And he was kind enough to give me a few of the Hades drills afterwards as well. Very, very, very kind gift, sir. Thank you. But just seeing someone turn up with basically the entire army of abhumans, all 3D printed, all in amazing Krieg colors, and to match the rest of his Krieg army was incredible. That I absolutely loved. But in addition to these Kriegers and these Bulgrins, there was also Inner Circle of the Dark Angels and the Guardian of the Forest, Kevin. Now, Kevin is my Warhound Titan, and I had given it to the Imperials as a little bit of reinforcements. And this is because I'd given the Tyranid side a bunch of my Kraken Nids as well. And both sides sort of earned their reinforcements. The Imperials had got it, for example, by getting the lion into the church and having him conduct a prayer. And they read a prayer out from the Imperial Uplifting Primer. So there was all this kind of cool, nice stuff that I gave them the Titan. And as someone who's used a Titan, it is an extra 1,000 points, but it's actually not that impactful. It's much more of a symbolic, like, here's a big bit of reinforcements, and it linked into the story from last time when a Titan had turned up, the Guardian of the Forest had turned up last event as well, when someone else had brought a Warhound. So it was really cool, and we're sort of developing the story around essentially the Guardian of the Forest. It's almost like the Green Knight in Bretonnia, but it's the Titan on the Gardens of Kadesh, and it's the spirit that defends the cathedral. But another big part of the Imperial final push for the church was the Cyclops demolition vehicles. Now, on both sides, you had these underground tunnels that could go to the church. This is a way of getting people across the board quickly. For the Imperium, who controlled the old fort, they could embark a unit into the fort and then they could disembark it out of the church. And for the Tyranids, they could do the same thing from Sloppy Bottom Village. The Imperials decided it would be a genius idea to take 15 Cyclops demolition vehicles and push them through the secret tunnels and have them all explode out of the church. Yes, I did ask if they were certain they wanted to do this, and there were grins all round, and they said they were absolutely certain they wanted to do this. So in the final turn, the Imperium unleashed their dozen Cyclopses, and they did a lot of mortal wounds to the Tyranid forces, but they didn't clear them. And in response, the Tyranids managed to fight back, and they swarmed the middle objective with about 100 Termagants. However, obviously there was a Titan there as well. So as far as I was concerned, it looked like the Imperials had the greater weight of forces over the church, until the Tyranids brought the Titan down using, I think it was a lot of firepower. They pretty much put all of their turn 2 firepower between their tower and the Orcs and the Tyranids, say turn 2, day 2 final turn firepower, I should say, to bring the Titan down. And as a result, that made it very equal. So what I said was the final result for the Guardians of Kadesh is it's a draw, because both sides control 2 objectives, and the weight of forces in the middle is very equals now that the Titan has come down. And the Imperials were successful in extracting a bunch of relics from there as well. So they did manage to achieve their narrative victory on the board as well. However, the Imperials also achieved the Chaos narrative victory. Because I said, look, you guys pushed 12 Cyclops demolition vehicles out of an ancient church. You also used a dozen Hades breaching drills to deep strike Bulgrin onto the church. That's a lot of underground tunnels being created. And at the same time, both sides had heavily used the secret underground tunnels from the old fort and from Sloppy Bottom. So the ground is very, very unstable. And all of those explosions, combined with the fall of the Titan and the shock that caused, essentially collapses the church. You know, the foundation had been so weakened, and the church, the Cathedral of Kadesh, has been collapsed. And so this site counts as being desecrated. So overall, it was a draw tactically for both sides, and both sides got a narrative victory out of this board. But then we have the other jungle board, the Deepwoods. This was the heart of the swarm, the epicenter of the Tyranid infestation on the planet. This was their stronghold. The Imperium recognized that they could not let the Tyranids have unfettered access, uncontested control of the heart of the jungle, where the biomass was the most verdant. And for years, between the First and the Second War, the Tyranids had been absorbing the biomass, had been absorbing the trees, but the more that they absorbed, the more it came back. Remember, when Tyranids start infesting a place, the local flora and fauna just grows out of control. Combine that with Thanatos' natural ecosystem, and the bugs had found an all-you-could-eat buffet beyond their wildest dreams. And if the Imperium did not do something, then there would be an unending tide of chitinous horrors. As a result, Imperial High Command launched a bold, daring, if not risky plan. Their mission on the Deepwoods was to launch a strike into the Tyranid spawning pools. Now, they tried destroying them from range, from orbit, and that had not worked. So they knew they had to get in there and figure some way out of blowing them up. Now, I didn't have a set way for the Imperials to deal with these spawning pools. I figured if they drove a death strike in and chose to detonate it, that would probably do something. Or if they could like get a Titan or a Knight in there and make it explode. There was all sorts. I was open to how the Imperials might want to try and destroy these things, but they definitely couldn't do it from range, because otherwise they'd just sit there and just blow them up before the Tyranids even had a chance. And the Imperial commanders went into this very confident. We're going to fight, yeah, and we're going to win. That was the general sentiment as the armies were being set up, and as people were traveling to it, they were like, "I'm gonna launch a nuclear bug hole. You get a lot of dead bugs. Yum yum yum. I can eat bugs for breakfast." That was a sentiment from the Imperial team, and I think this was definitely because this was a fresh Imperial team. You see, all the veterans from the last year's jungle board who'd fought over Kadesh were on Kadesh again from the Imperial side. And this time it was the Tyranid players who were the veterans of this board. And the Imperials, oh, they did not know what they were in for. They should have talked to Harfin, Commander Harfin, who we joked got a little bit of actual trauma from fighting on the jungle board last time. Because I will say this, the Imperium team, they did not know what they were in for. I think the first seeds of doubt began to creep into the minds of the Imperial commanders when they saw what the Tyranids were bringing. Multiple Bio-Titans. So many Gants that the floor was literally a carpet of bugs. When your Tervigons and Tyrannofexes look like Carnifexes, and your Carnifexes look like the size of warriors, you get an idea of how many goddamn bugs were on this map and how many big bugs were on this map. But I think what made the biggest difference was the army composition. You see, the Tyranid players last year had fought on this, and they had truly appreciated the impact that the dense forests would have. Both sides knew that the boards were going to be very, very deep, and that the forests would be very, very deep, I should say, and that line of sight was going to be an issue. It wasn't going to be a shooting gallery. But I think that the Tyranid team, having fought on a similar board to this last time, took advantage of the line of sight blocking terrain fantastically. And a huge portion of the Tyranid army consisted of infiltrators. They must have had a minimum of 50, 60 Lictors, Von Ryan Leapers, Neurolictors. Those mid-board forests were heavily infested during the Tyranid deployment zone, and this gave them a fantastic way of being able to pounce on the Imperials as they tried to push into the forest, and then push their way out of the forest themselves and launch a really, really good initial attack. On top of this, the Imperials had a truly staggering amount of firepower. Titans, Knights, entire companies of Shadow Swords, just a phenomenal amount of firepower. But they couldn't bring it all to bear because of the line of sight blocking terrain. And so the Imperium had made an error, which any Krieg player listening to this now will be shaking their heads at. And you're going to have to hold those Krieg players back, because they're going to want to, they're going to have some stern words with the Imperial team on Jungle Board. Jungle Board 2, we should say. Because the Imperium had brought a lot of direct firepower, but they hadn't brought much artillery at all. If you compare the indirect firepower available on this board in comparison to what people were bringing on the other boards, I mean, I genuinely can't remember seeing an Imperial artillery piece. There must be some. I mean, you'll see them in the pictures. But there were lots of Titans, there were lots of tanks, there were lots of infantry, lots of Space Marines, lots of Sisters of Battle, there were lots of things here. But one thing that was in short supply was artillery. And this really hampered Imperial efforts, because it meant that the Tyranids could swarm through the forests, completely infest the forests, and the Imperium initially really struggled to actually hit the Tyranids before the Tyranids hit their lines. However, like on the Gardens of Kadesh, in the Deepwoods, there were plenty of ways for sides to investigate things and to come up with narrative ways of being able to lift the fog of war. And so later on in the first day going into the second day, the Imperials were able to they narratively I helped them come up with this. They narratively used the Spirit of Yarrick space station. We had the captain of the Imperial team talking to the captain of the Spirit of Yarrick, and they used the Spirit of Yarrick to do radar scans to help lift the fog of war. There was a bunch of other ways they could have done it, but that was a cool way to get captains talking to each other and to sort of build this joint table narrative that the Spirit of Yarrick is not only over Thanatos, but it's actually over the Deepwoods as well. Now, it became obvious from the get-go that the Imperium was in trouble. But fortunately, I had prepared for such an eventuality, and there was a hidden subplot. Now, to be clear, if the Imperial team had made the spawning pools and destroyed them all, that was the main objective, and that was always their main objective throughout the event. But considering that the Tyranid players here and what they had done to the Imperials last time, I suspected that it may go the same way again. So I had conferred with the Chaos Captain and a few of the other players, and I had come up with this idea that the Imperial forces that had been sent in here, this whole offensive, had been orchestrated, had been engineered by the Inquisition. And there was this bunker that was on the map right in the Imperial deployment zone that was essentially an Inquisition observation post. And they'd been scanning the Tyranid, they've been trying to learn from them. And the one thing they didn't know, the Imperium had sort of categorized all sorts of bioforms and everything. One thing they didn't know is how would the Tyranids react if the Imperium poked the hornet's nest. And so this attack was that poke. And straight away the Imperium learned, don't poke the friggin' nest. Now, throughout the first day, I dropped hints to the Imperial team about this bunker that was in their deployment zone, because every other building was ruined. And I said, oh, that's interesting. That's like the only intact one. And about halfway through the first day, they finally twigged and went, wait, is that something we can investigate? And I said, guys, you can investigate anything in these boards. Not always will you get results, but you can investigate anything. And so over the second half of the first day and over the second day, the Imperium investigated this bunker, and they found that it was this Inquisition observation post. It was a deep underground complex full of scanning equipment, and that this information that was being scanned was being broadcasted off-world. And this is where I linked it to something that the Spirit of Yarrick guys had been doing as well, because they've been investigating loads of things, and they had one of the rooms that had been set up, just set up as like a little cool little lab. It just had like a few generators in there and a bit of terrain, and I hadn't originally intended it to be anything other than just a cool room that people could fight over. But the people on the Spirit of Yarrick were like, that's a cool lab, can we investigate it? And I was like, yeah, go for it. And basically they investigated this, and I linked the Spirit of Yarrick narrative to the Deepwoods narrative. And this is, in summary, what happened is the observation post had been beaming data up to the Spirit of Yarrick. It turns out that there's more to the Spirit of Yarrick than meets the eye, and actually there was a weapons lab up there. And in this weapons lab, there was all sorts of crazy experiments that were going on, like brains in jars and Tyranids that are being dissected and everything. And at one end, at the final sort of investigation, they found these two big vats. And when they opened one vat, green liquid came out of it, and they put it in like a little beaker. And on the other vat, red liquid came out. And I was like, okay, so you've got this red and this green liquid. What do you want to do with it? Imperial team immediately were like, make a guardsman drink it. So they made a guardsman drink the green liquid, and he dissolved and died. And they made a guardsman drink the red liquid, and he blew up and then exploded. Now, again, I had only originally sort of come up with the idea of these two can speak to each other. Data's been transferred to the lab. You've got these like different things that the Imperium has clearly been experimented on. But then the players came up with the idea of, well, can we unleash these chemicals onto the Tyranids? Can we teleport them down to the planet, because there was one of the objectives on the Spirit of Yarrick was a teleportarium. And I was like, yeah, of course you can, teleportarium, no problem whatsoever. So what they ended up doing is they're like, right, we're going to teleport one of the liquids into a spawning pool to see what it does to the Tyranids. And I was like, yeah, you could do that. That's really cool. Which one do you want to teleport down first? And they were like, let's teleport down the red liquid. And I was like, right, okay. The red liquid caused your guardsmen to blow up and then explode. Essentially, it caused uncontrollable growth. What the Imperium has done is they've been experimenting on the Tyranids, and they've worked out how the Tyranids can gestate so quickly, and they've made like a concentrated form of that for themselves. But you've just unleashed the super growth formula into a Tyranid spawning pool. You've just supercharged that spawning pool, and you've made the situation narratively a lot worse for the Imperium. And all of the Imperial players sort of groaned like, no, why did you do that? And the two captains like, I don't fucking know, we were just trying to play. It was so good. Not in a horrible way. The players were just really embracing the suck, embracing the narrative, be like, oh my god, we're dying out here. How the hell? I know you just made it worse. But then the next turn, on the last turn, they were like, right, we're going to teleport down the green liquid. And I was like, okay, we have to put it into a different spawning pool. And they were like, okay. I said, who? I said, now, last time you had a unit with a teleporter Homer on Thanatos, on the Deepwoods, that was able to guide it in. They had deep struck down a unit of Terminators or something like next to the spawning pool. So I said, this time you haven't got that. So how are you going to do it? And they were like, we'll send someone down from the space station with a teleporter Homer. And I was like, okay, cool. Who do you want to send down? And I just thought they were going to send like a random guardsman down, because they'd made a random guardsman like drink the liquid. But they were like, we'll send Pedro Cantor down because we've got him here. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, yeah, you know, Astartes sacrificed himself, you know, very noble, very Astartes. And just as they're about to do it, the captain of the Imperial team on the Spirit of Yarrick went, no, wait, I've got Yarrick as my Lord Solar because I've got Armageddon Steel Legion. Can I send him down? And I was like, bro, I've just had an amazing idea. Let's do this. So the story was that as Pedro Cantor stepped onto the teleport, as he was about to step on the teleportarium pad with a container of the green liquid, not knowing if he was going to make things better or worse, but knowing he had to try something, as he was about to step on, a hand rested on his shoulder and he went, stand down, Astartes. It's not yet your time. And he turns round and he sees Yarrick. And Yarrick, he's actually, I'm an old man. I've served the Imperium faithfully. I've served the Imperium loyally and faithfully for many years. Let me do this, son. The Imperium is going to need all the space marines it can get. I am but a man. And he grabs the vial off Cantor, goes on to the teleportarium, takes a teleporter Homer with him in the other hand, and teleports down. And the lore is that basically we wanted, if GW isn't going to give us like the official death of Yarrick, well, goddammit, we're going to make it. And so Yarrick teleported into the spawning pool, and the green liquid was unleashed, and the green liquid essentially dried up and made all the biomass in that spawning pool. It hardened it, crystallized it, solidified it, and ruined it. So even though the Imperium supercharged one spawning pool, they balanced it out by destroying one of the other ones. But out of the 3 or 4 spawning pools in the Deepwoods, this was the only one that the Imperium managed to neutralize. And everywhere else on that battlefield, the Imperium was stretched and almost, but not quite overrun. So what we did is we gave the tactical victory to the Tyranids because they had successfully defended all of their spawning pools. And they'd done so on a very wide board where there were like no choke points or anything either, not like on the city boards as well. So very, very well played to them. And we also gave the Tyranids a bit of a narrative victory, just a little bit of one, like a small narrative victory here, because 2 years in a row they'd basically just gone full Clendathu on the Imperium team and absolutely smashed it. But we also gave the Imperials a bit of a narrative progression here as well, because they didn't get completely overrun last time, and they were able to contain any Tyranid breakthroughs, and in the end, even though they got pushed back almost right to their deployment zone, they didn't get completely overwhelmed. And so the lore is that the Imperium attack has failed, but they were able to control the spread of the Tyranids, and they've created the Tyranid quarantine zone. But speaking of quarantine zones, we get to the last board of the event. The true chaos stronghold on the planet, the Inquisitorial Quarantine Zone, also known as the IQZ, or if you're American, IQZ. In the last war for Thanatos, this had been called the Polar Fortress, and both sides had attacked it to try and gain control of the large orbital laser that was there. Now, ultimately, the Imperium had controlled the laser by the end of the weekend, but a big reason why they've been able to do so is because the Chaos team had just completely embraced the narrative, and I'd put like a Chaos Shrine down on one of the bits of the map, and the Chaos team decided to just sacrifice stuff into the shrine. I don't think I'd originally planned for them to do it, but they embraced it. And as a result, over the course of the first event, I think they sacrificed about 15,000 points of their own army, which hugely depleted their ability to like actually attack the Polar Fortress. And essentially, they had chosen to give up the tactical victory just for narrative purposes. And I thought this was amazing. So the narrative result from last year was that the Imperium controlled the Polar Fortress, but the Chaos side were able to open a warp portal. Now, of course, the Inquisition doesn't like the idea of there being a warp portal and doesn't like to admit the existence of chaos in general. So what they had done between the First War and the Second War is they had set up the Inquisitorial Quarantine Zone. Very little information was given out around this board, and the Imperium was strictly controlling information, but those that knew, like the Inquisitors that knew, realized that this quarantine zone couldn't last forever. This is a warp portal, and the longer that it stays open, the more the planet is going to be corrupted. And so the mission in the second event, in the second war for Thanatos, was the Inquisition was going to launch a strike against this chaos stronghold to close the warp portal and to really reduce the influence of chaos on world. What I really like about the Imperial team composition on this board is they had put a lot of thought into who would actually launch a strike against a warp portal. So there were lots of like guardsmen and stuff, but there was also loads of Sisters of Battle, Inquisition kill teams, and there were Grey Knights and other anti-chaos specialists here as well. But the Chaos Army, oh my god, the Chaos Forces. They had a Warbringer Titan. In fact, this board had the most Titans on it out of any others. And what was really, really cool to see was the Titans engaging in epic duels. You had Reavers versus Warbringers. You had Warhound on Warhound. And rather than using these Titans to overly decimate each other's ground forces, both sides engaged in proper Titan duels, and it was epic to see. Many a time, a cry of engine kill went up from the polar board, from the Inquisitorial Quarantine Zone. But in the end, it was the Chaos side which had the greater weight of Titans and the greater Titan. And so they did end up winning the Titan duel. In fact, the Imperium's strike into the heart of Chaos was a bold one. It was a brave one, and they got so close. Early on day one, they launched a dozen Cyclops demolition vehicles into the chaos-infused walls of the stronghold, and they also detonated the reactor core of an enemy Titan there as well, bringing the walls down. If you notice, little side here, if you notice how like impactful Cyclopses have been throughout this event, like 3 or 4 tables, like Cyclopses like did stuff. They were part of bringing the walls down at Hive Primus. They were part of blowing up the cathedral on Kadesh. And now they've been a part of the be a part of the attack on the Chaos Stronghold. It was really great to see people like using the Cyclopses and trying to use them in ways that the in-game mechanics don't really reflect what they're meant to be used for. It was awesome that they came up with things and came up with ways of making the Cyclopses feel impactful. But going back to the main battle, the Imperium breached the walls early on and they started pouring forces into the gaps. But the Chaos base was festooned. It was filled with all sorts of abominations. And the Imperium realized that the frontal assault was working, but it was costing them too many lives too quickly. They were running out of assets. So then they tried a new tack. Now, around this board, I had placed lots of different like Chaos portals and stuff. And the Chaos team had been using them to launch like raids and attacks onto the Imperium from unexpected quarters. So the Imperium decided, hang on, if they can come out of the portals, can we go into the portals? The first thing that the Imperium sent into the portals, just to see if it was possible, see if they could even enter them, was a platoon of penal legionnaires. Yeah, they took the most morally questionable people in the Imperium, people who definitely have no goodness in them, and marched them into a warp portal. So obviously they all died. I was like, what do you think was going to happen? They were like, yeah, but the thing is, they went in, right? And I was like, yeah, they went in. They entered the warp portal. Like, they go both ways, clearly. You've learned that. You've also learned that you need to send something a little bit more sanctified, a little bit purer through if you actually want to pop out the other side. So that's when the Inquisition, the Imperial started sending like inquisitorial kill teams through. They started sending Grey Knights through, Sisters of Battle through, and there was a bunch of like dice rolls involved to see like how successful these excursions were. But the Imperium was able to successfully navigate the warp portals using Ordo Malleus Inquisitors and Grey Knights and some of the Pure of Heart Sisters. Although Ephrael Stern went into one of the warp portals, rolled a double one. And blew it up, which was kind of funny. But she is the anti-chaos person, so it kind of made sense. But the Imperium started using the warp portals to strike into the heart of the Chaos Shrine. And again, they got so close. At one point, between the guys popping out of the portals into the Chaos Zone, and then the Imperium taking all of their remaining air power, all of their remaining drop pods, and flying it onto the shrine, disembarking everything. They almost took and held the portal, but they just didn't quite manage it, and they lost a lot. They had a huge last ditch push in the third to last turn of the event, and they almost did it, but that goddamn Chaos Warbringer Titan, it reaped a terrible tally on the Imperial forces, and the Chaos were able to reclaim their shrine and keep the warp portal open. But there were still a few turns left over, and the Imperium still had a fair bit of resources like in the deployment zone, some backlines, some rear echelon units, and one of the Sisters of Battle player, Godlike Poet, had actually brought a Battle Sanctum, a beautifully painted Battle Sanctum as well. So the Imperial team came up to me and said, okay, we know we haven't closed the portal, but we want to try and set up a counter ritual to see at the very least if we can create a shield of faith that will hold and contain the chaos energies. And I was like, yeah, man, of course. Like, that's a great way of knowing, okay, I've lost like the tactical objective here, but how can I get like something narrative out of this? How can I progress the story? How can I influence this world? How can we get like maybe a full-blown narrative victory from this board if we can contain the chaos forces? And so what the Imperium team did is they pulled everything back. They went from the offense to the defense, and they said, look, we're setting up this ritual. We're going to start having prayers. All of the remaining Sister Battle units are going to go in there. They're going to be chanting and praying, and they're going to set up a counter ritual to see if in the last couple of hours of the event, if we can actually create the Shield of Faith. And I said, okay, if you can control that battle sanctum by the end of the event, and if the Chaos guys don't take it from you, there's a real good chance that you'll get the Shield of Faith, and at the very least the quarantine zone will remain intact. And then the Chaos guys came up to me and said, okay, well, if they're doing a counter ritual, can we do a counter ritual? Can we try and overwhelm their Shield of Faith with an outburst of insane chaos energy? And I was like, Okay, we're going to have a ritual off. All right, all right. So the Chaos team launched a big attack on the Battle Sanctum. They didn't quite break through. And so I said, okay, well, the Imperium, you've managed to get your ritual off. You've done it. And the Shield of Faith starts to form around this Chaos land. And you're starting to contain the energy. You're not closing the warp portal. This is going to be a problem for another day. But at the very least, you might be able to come away with stopping chaos spreading everywhere. All right. Now, Chaos side. How are you going to do your ritual? And they said, we have gathered over 11,000 points in the vicinity of the shrine. And we want to sacrifice all of this. And what we're going to do is there's 5 Chaos players here. We're going to have one of each Chaos player, of the first 4 Chaos players, dedicate their sacrifice that they're putting in to a particular god. And then the Chaos team captain, the overall captain, not only for the board, but for the whole Chaos team here, Death Noise Marine, was like, and then at the end, I'm going to take all of that energy, sacrifice myself, and put it to Chaos Undivided. And that way, all the gods have been pleased, and then I've sacrificed my life to bring all the gods together. And if we do that, will that overwhelm the Shield of Faith? And I was like, I said, honestly, that probably will overwhelm the Shield of Faith. That'll probably do it. Now, I could describe the Chaos ritual. I could describe it. Or I could show you a video that someone took of the final Chaos ritual of the event.
The changer of ways.
I will burn the galaxy entire in your unholy name. Kadesh, to the god of excess. My needs are endless, my thirst never-ending, my eternal soul is yours. Nurgle!
Praise Papa Nurgle!
Invest me with your infinite power, your timeless wisdom, and your endless death. Corn!
Corn cares not from whence the blood flows!
Grant me your martial glory, that none may stand in my way.
Take up the knife. And so, this is a giant ritual. To create an intense amount of chaos psychic energy. And you're wanting to try and beat their ritual. And as you go to plunge the knife in, and to dedicate it to Chaos Divided, the little voice back in your head goes, what if I use all this energy for me? So you have a choice. Do you use the energy to help your team punch through the counter rituals? Or do you keep the energy for yourself?
That could be your path to demonhood. That could be your path to demonhood, dude.
Slanesh, fill me to bursting. I am yours.
And he doesn't sacrifice himself. And he gets all the energy. And he ascends to demonhood.
Yes.
The quarantine zone is intact. As he ascends, golden light flickers. There you go.
Right. Now we know what we need.
And there you have it. The Chaos team so close to ultimate victory. But Chaos is fickle. Chaos does not work together. Chaos is a pit. It is a ladder. And everyone's got to look out for themselves. And so the Chaos team captain did not use the energy to push down the Shield of Faith. And instead used it to ascend to demonhood, which is just amazing, and absolutely the perfect ending to this table, and it was also the perfect ending to the event as well.
Alone. Completely alone. But if not, you need to know the purge has failed. The lost and the damned return for more bloodshed. The aegis of the dark gods
with that, the final battle came to a close. The dust settled and an eerie calm fell over the planet. Another huge year of battles, another huge year of offensives. But what was the end result? Well, overall, the Imperium team did achieve the tactical victory. They had won more boards. But what had they won? They were king of the ashes. Hive Primus was gone. They had depleted huge amounts of manpower. They had definitely lost more than the Chaos team had consistently across the different boards. The most spiritual site on the map was gone, and their food supply had been halved. Combine this with the fact that they had failed to close the Chaos Warp Portal, and all they'd managed to do is bottle the Tyranids up in the Tyranid quarantine zone, but without actually resolving that problem. And the Imperium may have won the battles, but they were definitely not winning the war. And so overall, the narrative victory went to the Chaos side. And let me just say a huge well done and well played to both teams. The event was just a pleasure to run, and it was great to look around and see so many happy wargamers and people that were using their big models and so that they don't normally get to bring out from their collections. And the Imperium team, they did win that tactical victory, and they had a lot of pre-planning. But don't get me wrong, they had a lot of narrative epic moments as well. I mean, it was after all, it was their idea to flood the Underhive. It was their idea to launch the Shield of Faith and the counter ritual on the polar board. And likewise for the Chaos team, they did a great job of working out how they were going to win certain boards. And the Tyranid team, very well played to the Tyranid sub team on the Chaos side. They've smashed it on the jungle boards 2 years on a row. On top of this, it's been really interesting to see some of the trends that have emerged from each team on these events. 2 years in a row, the Imperium has focused on the tactical victories, and 2 years in a row, the Imperium has won the most boards. But 2 years in a row, the Chaos team has embraced the narrative victory, and it's interesting to see which victory each side seems to be pursuing just by natural instinct. But I also think this is a really cool example of the amazing different kinds of players and personalities that we have in this hobby of Warhammer. On the one hand, you have the players that care more about the hard factors. You know, how do I win? What are the objectives? What am I trying to achieve? And then on the other side, you have those players that victory, winning, losing, it doesn't mean a huge amount to them. What they are here to do is forge the narrative. And I think that this event has done a really good job, and I'm hoping so, and I'd love for you guys to know what you guys think, but I think this event has done a good job of bringing these two cultures together, and you can get a little bit of everything out of this event. And there's a reason why we have the tactical victory and we have the narrative victory, because for some people, the tactical victory is more important, and that's what they can pursue, and that's what they can get out of the event. And for other people, it's the narrative victory, it's the world building, and that's what they can get out of the event as well. But that just about wraps it up for this event. But I know there's going to be a couple of big questions on people's minds. Are we doing another one? And if so, where can we get the tickets from? If you've enjoyed what you've seen today and you want to get involved, there should be, at the time that this video goes out, a link down in the description to where you can buy your tickets from, and you'll get them from the Element Games store. This year we had about 80 tickets available. I thought that would be the maximum that we could accommodate with the space we've got at Element Games, but there is a chance to squeeze in a couple more tables. I don't want to completely cram the place though. I want to make sure there's places people put their bags and stuff like that. So we're going to increase the capacity slightly to 100 players, and we're going to try and see if we can go for 10 tables. If all has gone to plan, when this video is released, the tickets will be available on the Element Games web store, and there'll be a link to the tickets in the description down below. Now we're planning on expanding the event slightly up to 100 players. We had 40 the first time, we've had 80 the second time. I've had a good look around Element. I thought 80 would be the max we could fit in, but there was plenty space left over, so we're going to expand it just a little bit more. I don't want to expand it too much because I don't want it to become overcrowded. I want there to be places for people to put their bags and stuff like that, and not for everyone to be squashed in like sardines. So we're going to go from 80 tickets up to 100, and they will be on a first come, first serve basis. And to get you guys hyped up and to give you a bit of a sneak preview, here's some of the ideas I'm currently playing around with for some of the maps that will be happening next year. We've got the Ostland Shield returning, but this time the fortifications will have been finished. We hope to have a full trench network. Spirit of Yarrick will return, but it's going to be a little bit infected. The IQZ is now going to be the Chaos Wastes. Oh dear. Manufactorum will be returning. We'll have the Tyrannid Quarantine Zone. We're going to have Kadesh drop for all you Starship Troopers fans. I have had a request for a beach assault, so we might have the T-Day landings. Hive Secundus, which has only been hinted at up until this point, is going to make an appearance. Gelt's Folly, the ruins of Hive Primus, might make an appearance. And then I've had a request for an all-orc board, which I'm tempted to call the Battle of Mordianglorytv. Now, if you want to know what's going to happen on all the different boards, well, you'll just have to wait and see. I'm being somewhat mysterious, but also I haven't finalised all of the details, if I'm going to be brutally honest with you. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Leave lots and lots of comments below. Now, especially if you are at the event and I have missed something epic out that happened on your table, please share that down in the comment section, because I'm sure a lot of the people that didn't manage to come to the event would love to know some of the awesome stories that happened over the course of the 2 days. Also, if you've got any feedback or anything like that, put it down there. And if you're just excited, then let me know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the mordianglorytv Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordianglory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordianglory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier patrons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.